Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, the finance podcast that's about more than just money. I'm your host, Taborjan Rasaya, financial advisor to hundreds of successful clients over the years. In each episode of this show, I speak with other experts in the complex world of money and finance, and together we discuss how you can ensure you make smart decisions with your money. Even more importantly, how to connect those decisions with your values and your purpose in order to achieve everything that is most important to you. Please note that everything we discuss is not personal advice, but general in nature. For the full disclaimer, please visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, where you can also register your details to get access to all our free resources. And please hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. In today's episode, I speak to Peter Mancell. Peter is the founder of Mancell Financial Group and the managing director of FYG Planners, a privately owned financial services licensee built by advisors for advisors. What sets Peter apart, however, is his 40 years experience as a financial advisor that he continues today. In this episode, we discuss the importance of having a structured approach to building wealth and what we have learned about what that structure should look like and how it can be implemented. We also talk about the benefits of focusing on the qualitative elements of money, including purpose. Peter has some great real-life stories of clients that have really benefited from this approach. And make sure you listen to the end, where Peter tells us about his own purpose and how he is going about achieving it. So if you're interested in learning more about the building blocks of your financial strategy, you will enjoy this episode of the Rich with Purpose podcast. Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast. Good to see you, Peter Mancell.
Hi, Taborjan. Good to be here.
Peter, I'm really excited about having a chat to you. You're a veteran in the industry, 40 years experience giving advice, and I'm really pleased to have you on to be able to share your experience and a lot of wisdom that you've gained over the years in planning, but also just in life with our listeners. We've already had, as part of this foundation series of episodes, we've spoken about how purpose fits into making decisions with money, and even though it's not the usual way people think about it, how powerful it can be into really make a big difference in people's lives. On another episode, we spoke about the evolution of financial advice and how that has changed over time, and the landscape and the challenges that consumers need to face when trying to find someone that they may want to partner with, or if they're doing things themselves, where they should refer to. And we've also had an episode talking about the idea about building a picture of your financial life holistically, not just dealing with individual issues in isolation, and how important that is. So, Peter, I wanted to get you on with someone that has so much experience helping clients for many, many years. I think 40 years, is it now?
Yeah, indeed. Clocked over 40 years in February. It's as clear as a bell. My first day in the industry all those years ago on the 10th of February, 1980. But a lot of water's passed under the bridge since then. Yeah,
amazing. And what we've spoken about sharing with listeners is really, we have spoken about some high-level things like values and purpose and linking money decisions to those things. And, this whole podcast is about that concept of connecting with your purpose and values. However, it's not just a high-level fluffy thing that we can just have as an idea. Underneath all of that is so important to have good implementation and structure. Mm-hmm. And you're someone, similar background to myself, very numbers based, very logical based. And I think having that background, we're able to take those important concepts, which are connecting with people at an emotional and a human level, but then making sure that we're really good at implementing that by having some good structure around how we do things. So I'd like to explore that with you But before we get into that, Peter, can you please share with us a little bit about your journey into financial advice and how a cricketer ends up becoming a superstar in financial planning?
Well, I don't know whether I'm a superstar at financial planning. A modest cricketer, certainly not a superstar I was. But yeah, look, I'm originally from New South Wales, grew up in a single income family, luckily a supportive and loving family, 6 siblings. I was lucky to get a good education. I studied a science degree and ended up with a major in applied mathematics from the University of Sydney. The job market in Sydney for someone with a maths background didn't look particularly appealing in 1979. And as luck would have it, Tasmania were making their first forays into first-class cricket around Australia. And I was one young guy in Sydney that was tapped on the shoulder by someone that was up there recruiting, and I was certainly willing to take the risk. So I moved to Tasmania in May of 1979 to follow a cricket career. And whilst guaranteed a job by one of the local companies here, certainly, even though I'd had some chemistry background, working in a chemical laboratory certainly did not suit me. And one of the guys at the local cricket club was an advisor with one of our big financial institutions, MLC at the time. And he said, why don't you come and have a talk to our manager? And I liked the idea of a job where, you know, my own success was not limited by what someone else dictated. And secondly, the hours of work that I would work would allow me to train for cricket as often and as seriously as I wanted to. And certainly I did want to. So it was February the 10th, 1980 that I started with MLC, but quickly branched out into using the services of other financial institutions and obtained my own financial services license in 1991. And at that point, we really became truly independent of any major financial institutions and started on a journey where we just worked for clients.
Mm-hmm. And when you got onto this journey, did you have any idea what financial planning was or what you were getting yourself into? Was it?
Not particularly. As I said, you know, growing up in a one-income, 7 children home, Dad was a manager with a local furniture store. Money was not a thing that was prevalent in our household. You know, we were the classic, you know, working class battling family. And so I certainly didn't grow up with money. I certainly didn't have a lot of it when I came to Tasmania. Everything I owned fit in a Toyota Corolla station wagon. Yeah, money was something that I had to learn about myself. I guess I did learn frugality from my parents, and I certainly was able to live and ensured that I lived within my means, both when I was a university student, but also when I moved to Tasmania. Because at the outset, I certainly didn't have a high income. I had to, you know, rent accommodation. It wasn't long after I moved here, I needed to buy a new car. Fortunately, I was able to do those things without the pressure of family. Frugality was something I learned from my parents, and then gradually learned lessons, you know, as my time in the industry evolved. I was always an avid learner, an avid reader, and I started, you know, studying finance at a broader level right from the word go.
Thanks for that background, Peter. So it was 91, I think you said, that you got your own license and effectively distanced yourself from any institution. It's something that we spoke a fair bit about with Clayton Daniel in episode 2, where, you know, the distinction between advisors that work for an institution and those that do not. Just really quickly, can you just explain from your perspective the difference that has made in your ability to give advice?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is that those that do have connections to financial institutions, it doesn't make them bad advisors by any means. But I think the fundamental difference is this, that the advisor that chooses the independent path only works for one master, and that's the client. Our sole focus, everything that's central to what we do, is for the benefit of the client, and nobody else can influence the way we act for the client, hoping to assist the client to live the life that they want to live, free from any influence I think that's really, the key from my point of view. Nobody can influence the way we try to help our clients.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's enabled you to then have real control over how you design the way that you look after clients. I'm sure it's evolved since 91. In my only nearly 20 years in the industry, I've seen so much change. So I'm sure you would have seen an immense amount of change over that time.
Sure. Well, we go right back to the beginning. It was about product sales, and that was the whole industry. It didn't matter whether someone came from a life insurance company background, whether they worked for somebody years ago like AFT, or whether they were a stockbroker. At the end of the day, the only time an advisor got rewarded or paid was when clients bought products. And today it's completely the opposite of that from our perspective. It's all about helping the clients to find the optimal way to be able to live the life they want to live, making smart decisions with money. So everything we do is about how best to help them get what they want. It's got nothing to do with promoting a product in any way, shape or form. The change has been colossal. It's literally a 360-degree turnaround.
And I think that's manifested itself, that approach, which some of us have been doing for many years, but the Royal Commission has really forced that, the banks getting out of advice, and still as the industry professionalises, as we get closer to that 2026 year, that's going to continue. So it's great to see for consumers that they'll know that they're getting advice that's going to help them.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, wouldn't it be great, if there were, 15 or 20 million adult Australians out there that knew that everybody that gave advice was actually just working for them.
Mm-hmm. So as you've done this, Peter, I know you have a process and a structure, even though we spend a lot of time talking to clients, getting to understand them at a deep level, what's really important to them, what they're trying to achieve in life. There is a structured approach that you talk about, which makes a lot of sense in order to guide that delivery of advice to help clients. Can you talk us through what that process is?
Sure. Our view is that advice has got three very distinct phases to it, if you like, components to it. The first is really around clarity. And the number one part of that is clarity about what's important to the person we're going to be giving advice to, or the person that might be, approaching us for the very first time. From our perspective, it's absolutely critical to spend all the time that's necessary to truly understand all the things that are important to that client, whether it be, whether it be their family, whether it be, the pathway that they want to hope to put children on, whether it be their careers, whether it be about the lifestyle that they choose to live. It could be about supporting aged parents. It could be about philanthropy. There's a whole raft of aspects that we ask clients to speak about when we're trying to truly get to understand the things that are important to them. Over 40 years, I've found that where we really understand what's important, what drives those people, what they value most, what they cherish most, they're where we have the best client relationships on an ongoing basis, and where they get the greatest amount of satisfaction out of being able to gain advice from people like us. So firstly, it's clarity around what's important. Secondly, getting absolute clarity about where they're at today, because that tells us a lot about what they've done with money up to that point in time as it relates to the lifestyle goals, aspirations and values that they have. So getting clarity first around what's important, then about where they are now, that's the first phase from our perspective.
And these are, I guess these steps as well, Peter, are things that whether you're getting advice or whether you're looking at your own affairs to make decisions, following these steps is a really good foundation for making good decisions. So for all the listeners, that's it's not about getting advice. It's about a process that you use to make better decisions. Sorry, Peter. So after
Absolutely.
that first stage, yeah.
Absolutely. It's really important if you're going to start planning for the rest of your life, to really know what you want it to look like, for the person you're going to take advice from to also know what you want it to look like, and then to have real clarity about where you're at today. And that doesn't just include the money stuff today. It's how people feel about whether they're traveling well towards those aspirations, those values that they really want to live out in the years ahead.
Yep, absolutely. So we get clarity about what's important to us, what are our values, what's our purpose, what do we want to achieve. We get clarity about what our current situation is, and so that next step in the process, what does that look like?
Okay, so assuming that the prospective client's been able to give us the necessary information about where they're at today, that's just really data gathering. So we've got all of that. So then it's our job to look at that and analyse that relative to what their lifetime aspirations and values really are. And in doing so, we're going to bring our insights, to bear on that information and all the sharing that they've done with us up to that point, to identify firstly what it is they might not be doing very well at now. And that could be as simple as having assets held in the wrong name. It could be that there are tax liabilities that that they could be reducing. It could be that there are incurring fees with regard to existing investments that are unreasonable. It could be an unstructured or poorly put together investment approach. It could be any number of things, but it's up to us to honestly be able to portray to the client that there are certain things that they're not doing as well as they could, and really bring those to their attention. And in doing so, then the next part of that phase is, of course, to explain to them what they can do better than what they are now. And I believe from one of your other contributors, using really sophisticated tools to map out what their future might look like if they just keep doing things the way they are now. And in doing so, being able to show them where the shortfalls might be in being able to live the future life that they want to live. And of course, showing them what they could do better and how much better their future could look. So that's really the insights that we bring. What are they not doing as well as they could? What could they do better? And then clearly demonstrating how much better their future could look if they implement the right type of advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that process of what we refer to as interactive cash flow modeling or scenario analysis, or building a picture of your financial life, if you like, which we talked about last episode, is just critical, because so often solutions are provided at a very micro level, dealing with a specific issue, and sometimes that's appropriate, but it's never going to have the impact in someone's life if you don't understand the long-term impact of that decision, and also the options and the and how the different variables and different choices that we have in life interact to get us to where we want to go. So anyone that's trying to make those big decisions, whatever they may be, and even small decisions. I mean, saving an extra $5,000 a year, knowing the impact of that on your long-term position is critical, and you can all that up. But knowing how that is done is really important. So running those scenarios and looking at those impacts into the future and how that impacts future goals or future life is critical.
I couldn't agree more. I know it's been dealt with in the previous episode, but I could only be supportive of the previous commentator on the issue. The detailed, comprehensive modelling long-term of someone's future, when they can see the impact of the advice and the way in which it can improve their long-term prosperity, has a profound impact on people that are really engaged with getting good advice and wanting to live the way they want to live. I remember so clearly, only a couple of years ago, the wife of a doctor in Sydney, who I actually hadn't met face to face, one of the earliest people that I engaged with using video conferencing. And the first time I got to meet her, and she's only a tiny little lady, was at a hotel just to say hi and have a drink after a conference in Sydney. And she almost leapt at me and hugged me, and she said, "Thank you. You've given me back my husband. We know where we're headed." I was just amazed. But it was all from doing the planning the right way, being thorough about it, understanding what they want. And both she and he now felt they had genuine direction for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been reading a fantastic book that's been written recently by a guy called Morgan Housel, a fantastic writer. The book's called The Psychology of Money, and every chapter deals with a certain element of how we think about money. And the one I was reading recently was talking about how confidence about the future and getting back time are two things that have a immense impact in our lives. We tend and impact on our happiness. The natural thing that most people think, conventional wisdom, if you like, is that the more money you've got, the happier you're going to be. We all kind of know that that's not true, but we don't really know what else to do. So we kind of, as humans, we kind of think, well, if I can just get a bit more money, then I'll be able to do more stuff and I'll be happier. But what he was talking about from some of the studies that have been done in this area is that confidence about the future gives you that much more happiness than time. And this idea of doing that cash flow modeling, looking into the future, I can think of a number of examples, but one in particular, some clients that we worked with about 3 years ago, and they came in, they obviously had some things on their mind, which we discussed. But when we went through this interacting cash flow modeling process, by the end of that, and we did it over a couple of meetings, you could just see their shoulders just relax and this weight just gone, because they've said, oh, wow, we had no idea whether we'd be okay or not. We thought we would kind of maybe be okay, but we just didn't know. And you've just helped us see the direction we're going. And secondly, we can see the possibilities that the future might have for us. And, for me, that, that's just a absolutely satisfying thing. That's the sort of thing that, gets me up in the morning to do this every day. But,
Sure.
that's the impact that sort of work can do. And I mean, you would have had that experience with a lot more people than I have over the years.
Couldn't agree more. And you meet people from all walks of life. Some people that have got lots of education in a formal sense, some not so much, some that are incredibly smart and some that aren't. But irrespective of that, most people don't have the innate ability to do the sort of financial forecasting and truly understand where they're headed financially, and the relief that it provides to them once they can see it mapped out. I would agree with you. It's really quite profound. It's been profound on many instances for me over a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we go through that scenario analysis. As far as that process goes, what happens next?
Well, the most important sort of capstone to the advice process for me is for the advisor to have a really honest conversation off the back of that detailed financial modelling about whether the client is actually going to be able to live the way they want. Because sometimes the scenarios won't show up exactly the way they would like. And then it's a case of saying, well, okay, what can we do about these goals and aspirations? How can we make them attainable? Is it that we need more time to get to, if you like, a particular destination point? Or is it that, the type of investment approach they have to adopt needs to be different to the one that their innate preference would be? So the final stage in the advice process for us is really the really honest conversation about whether they're on track to be able to have the future life that they've painted, the picture that they prefer.
Mm-hmm. And then part of that process, I suppose, is then decision making about this is what we can do to improve where we're going and taking control of that future.
Indeed, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, sharing that process there, Peter. So I guess then we get into thinking about some of the areas that people need to think about taking care of. I think it's really important for us to be able to share this with listeners, because, we do it every day. We know what people should be looking for. And most people that we talk to, most of them come out of it saying, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that, or, geez, I didn't even realize I had to deal with that particular issue. But, some that come to mind, which you've mentioned, whether tax structuring, making sure we're not paying too much tax, the wealth creation strategy and having some a real deliberate approach to that. For those who are nearing retirement and thinking about that phase of life where they're going to have to rely on assets to give them the cash flow that they need to do the things that they want to do. And then moving even further along into philanthropy and the giving phase of life, which can be early, it can be later, but it usually requires some level of financial security and financial strength in a position. And then finally, estate planning, which I say finally, but really it's a continuation of a legacy that passes to children and grandchildren. And that's a really powerful thing that's going to be important. We are going to speak to some experts in some of these specific areas about how people should be thinking about these specific areas. But from your perspective, again, getting back to that structured approach to making sure that you take care of the things you want, can you just give our listeners some tips about how they can go about planning for some of these elements?
Sure. Well, I think, all of the things that you've touched on are really important. Just if you start with taxation planning, if you get that wrong at the end of the day, you will donate more to Treasury than you otherwise need to. And if you do that, of course, there's less available for you to do the things that you'd like to do or to accumulate so that you can get to the point where you can do more of what you want to do. So taking good taxation advice, it's not about trying to rob the Commonwealth in any way, and certainly I would never promote that. But every taxpayer, every client that we look after owes it to themselves to pay only what they're obligated to pay, and to utilise structures that are ineffective to end up paying more tax is to disadvantage oneself, when you don't need to. And over the years, we've found a colossal number of instances where this has been dealt with wrongly. One particular client sold their business to a British public company, and their accountant estimated their capital gains tax liabilities. And I looked at the calculations, and I just knew they weren't right. I knew there was something in there that had been overlooked. And ironically, I had to go back through physical files. This is before we had all electronic files, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper. And this business had gone through a change of structure about 8 years prior. And I found evidence of that change of structure that the accountant for the firm had never actually brought to account properly in the assessment of the capital gains tax liability. And we saved the client about $1.25 million. And we didn't do anything improper. We didn't do anything that wasn't available to the client. We just made sure it was done right. As it turns out, they then chose to donate all of that tax saving to a charitable trust, and they've since given away all of that and more from the funds that have been invested. Tax planning, absolutely vital.
Yeah, that's a great story. And with tax, I've heard someone say once, and it really gets you thinking, our biggest expense in life on any single thing is tax.
Yeah.
We don't spend money on, we buy lots of stuff, but nothing that adds up to the lifetime of tax. And the other thing that, as you talk about tax, is the number of people we see where they have a particular event, like a business sale or something, or an asset sale, and often they think about tax at that point in time. And how do I manage the tax now that this has happened? But so often, we've had clients that they're going through that event, and I look at it and I say, geez, if you had planned for this 20 years ahead or 10 years ahead, you could have saved yourself a hell of a lot of tax. And there's much less that we can do now relative to how much we could have saved you with good planning ahead of time.
Yeah, I can give you a great flip side story to the one I just told you. A client we engaged with about 4 years ago, they came to us in the October and they'd sold a property in the March prior, and they had a $7 million capital gain. And they've done obviously very well out of this property, but that of course meant a $3.3 million extra tax bill for them. And when they spoke to me in the October, and as it turns out, finding out a lot about these people's lifestyle and the sorts of things they do, they routinely give away to charitable endeavours at least $500,000 a year. And I was talking to their names are Graham and Leslie, and I said, so you've been doing this giving for a very long time? Yep. I said, so why didn't your accountant talk to you about setting up a charitable foundation? You could have used the gain, put it into the foundation, used that to do the giving going forward, and you wouldn't have paid the $3.3 million of tax. And Graham's response was, well, why didn't our accountant tell us that? I said, because he doesn't look over your whole affairs. He just does your tax work. I said, that's why you need someone like us to help you make sure you don't miss opportunities like that. Now, that's just one example of a tax scenario that could have gone a lot better.
Yeah, there's so many examples like that, isn't it, Peter? And, you're talking, huge amounts of money that people give away through the lack of getting that stuff right.
Yeah. Bit of forward thinking.
Yeah, that's it. So you've touched on, a couple of things there, that are related tax, but, that does link back to philanthropy you've mentioned as well, and planning for that, estate planning as well. One of the things that is a real challenge in our finance world is investing. As you and I have talked about many times, the finance industry is really good at extracting money from investors. If you can sell a sexy story or some sort of interesting idea or a silver bullet or promise something to clients, then unfortunately as humans we're drawn to these great ideas, and unfortunately what ends up happening is we've seen plenty of investors lose out in a big way through some scandals and some really bad practices. But probably even less obvious is most investors don't even know how they're going with their investments, and they just hope and assume that things are going okay. Again, one of the similarities between ourselves is being maths background. We're students of really analysing things and questioning things all the time, looking for the evidence, wanting to see the proof of how things work. And, I know that because of that, just because someone comes up with a great idea and that sounds really exciting and interesting, which again, with good marketing and the media and people selling nice things, nice ideas and investments, it's really easy to get carried away with that stuff. But again, having that analytical approach, we certainly have that in common, where we really want to see how things work and understand, and not just be sold on an idea. Can you talk about the importance of having an investment philosophy? We need not talk about your investment philosophy specifically or mine, but the importance of actually having one and having some really good structure when trying to figure out how to go about coming up with a philosophy or knowing how to make good investment decisions.
Sure. Well, couldn't agree more with your intro, insofar as, yes, with the maths background, I want to see the data, I want to see the evidence that supports whatever investment approach, either we're going to implement or that anyone else has implemented for that matter. I want to see the evidence. And I think that's critical to start with. And every investor, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how simple they might be, large or small, absolutely needs an investment philosophy to follow and needs to be prepared to stick with it. There are multiple different approaches to investing, some absolutely backed by evidence, some not so much. But at the end of the day, whatever you're going to do, you need to be consistent with it. To chop and change strategies routinely just because something might not work at a particular point in time is probably one of the worst handicaps that investors can face. And a couple of quick examples of it. If we wind the clock back to March of 2009, which was the absolute bottom of the share markets around the world in the global financial crisis, that particular day was the number one largest day that members changed their super fund investment strategies for Australian super in history. So the number one time that people changed their investment approach was the single worst day they could have done it at any time in the 21st century.
I think we saw that data, people getting out of shares at the bottom and
absolutely.
into cash.
Yep. And just recently, the number of investors that changed from the default funds to cash with the host, I think it's Host Plus, or it might be Hester, was the 24th of March this year, right at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic panic. So quite simply, investors that chop and change inevitably harm themselves. And I can tell a very personal story. A client of ours from Hobart, long-term friends as well. The husband's nerves got the better of him in October 2008. And whilst he didn't sack us as his advisor, he insisted that everything go to cash. And I pleaded with him, but I just couldn't convince him to not force us to take that course of action. Anyway, I said to, his name's Graham, I said, Graham, the only way this can work for you is if you can reinvest at a later time when things are even worse. Is that really something you're going to be able to do? And he said, I don't know. Anyway, the media commentary, the narrative of the time had changed by early March, 2009. And as I said, March 6 was the low point. And I rang and I said, Graham, I'd really love you and Sally to invest, at least some of the money that you took out of the equity markets. No. And he wouldn't do it again at the end of March, midway through April, still wouldn't do it. And it took him to about the middle of May to agree. By then, markets are already up 25%. Anyway, Graham and Sally have been long-term friends as well for a very long time. So in the February, they came to visit us and stayed with my wife and I at our beach house. But the first thing we had to do was their February review meeting. And of course, the markets have continued to go forward and they seemed quite content with the results. And I said, look, but I've got to show you this. And I'd actually done the analysis of how much that awful decision had cost them. And they cost themselves $300,000. And for me, I felt so disappointed that I couldn't convince them not to harm themselves. But at the end of the day, I had to have an honest conversation with them about what they had done to themselves. And it hurt because they're our friends, and to think that they're $300,000 poorer through their own poor decision-making was really disappointing. So at the very crux of how to invest, find a philosophy that's based on evidence, where the data does support the process that you're going to use to invest, and stick to it. Don't chop and change. It's chopping and changing, without doubt, after 40 years of observation, is a losing strategy, and one that I've sadly seen people like Graham and Sally, harm themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point around sticking to the strategy, managing emotions. We're all emotional creatures. Those times that you spoke about, 2008 and earlier this year, 2020, they were difficult times for investors generally, and anyone that pretended to know what was going to happen, has been proven wrong. In hindsight, everyone's a genius, of course, and claims to have wisdom. But I think what's really important is that we acknowledge what we don't know, but make sure that we have, again, as you said, the right process and the right philosophy, so that we stick with the philosophy that we've got in place. There's a really good quote that I remember learnt many years ago. Benjamin Graham If you haven't heard of Benjamin Graham, he was the mentor for Warren Buffett. And if you haven't heard of Warren Buffett, look him up. You'll get pages and pages of Google, considered the greatest investor of our time. But his mentor, the guy that taught Warren Buffett everything, said, to invest successfully over a lifetime does not require stratospheric IQ, unusual business insight, or inside information, which is obviously illegal anyway. What he said was, what is required is a sound intellectual framework for making decisions and the ability to keep emotions from corroding that framework. So when I read that quote, which one of my mentors taught me, a guy called Kevin Bailey, that really resonated with me, and you can see that I know that quote back to front. I learned that 15 years ago, and the reason I remember it is because every word is absolutely true. Having that framework and keeping emotions from corroding that framework, as you said, Peter, the biggest killer of people's wealth is their emotions, causing them to make decisions which end up not being the right decisions, not because they're stupid, just because it's hard being an investor when things are so volatile. So yeah, it's
and I'd just like to add, having been in the industry 40 years, 2 years ago I got one of my staff to help me with, and we went back to 1980, and it's certainly not hard to add the last 2 years being 2019 and 2020 to it, but we were able to find at least one substantial event every single year over that previous 38 years. And of course, now we've had COVID-19. So it certainly isn't hard to add the last couple. That would indicate to investors, because of the news, why you shouldn't want to invest. And yet over the same period, global stock markets have delivered returns in excess of 10% per annum across that whole period. And yet you could find something every single year to indicate why you shouldn't invest. Quite simply, have a good strategy, have the right sort of process and framework that underpins that strategy, and then stick with it. It'll serve you well.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice, Peter. So, being able to stick to the strategy is, such an important part. The other part is, knowing what philosophy to use in the first place, which is, there's so many different ways that people can invest in, so many different products and processes out there. Again, we're going to have people in future episodes to talk about the specifics of some of the investment philosophies out there, some of those that work, some of those that don't work. We're going to get really smart people on this show to help you understand what to look for. But I think one of the things to acknowledge out of that as well, Peter, is that we've got to make sure we don't get fooled by the stuff that sounds really sexy, the next greatest thing. You're a really smart guy, Peter. With your maths background and all the studies you've done, really well read. I consider myself to be, reasonably intelligent as well, and being very analytical. Again, wanting to always understand things. I find that what's really important is that even sometimes the complexity can become too complex, and I do feel that if a investment philosophy can't be understood by the regular person in common sense, yes, there might be some complexities that sit underneath it, but the premise, you need to understand what's going on. If something sounds too complicated, then perhaps it's got some stuff going on there that may be a bit more sales or maybe a bit too complicated. That's just something that I've found, having studied so many different investment approaches over the years. You've seen a lot more than I have, Peter, and studied a lot more. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Over 40 years, I have seen a plethora of products, that have been promoted, particularly, I would say, in the earlier days of my career. People would come up with the next hot thing, And all I can say is it might have been hot at some point, but most of them very quickly went cold. You touched on the word simplicity on the way introducing that question. Over the years, I've found that the simpler things get, the more reliable they become. So as you also pointed out, if something's too hard to explain and for the end investor too hard to understand, they almost certainly should avoid it. There's just all sorts of trouble. The more complex you get, the more it involves some human being making some prediction about what will happen or what might happen. Those sort of things are recipes for disaster. Evidence-based, simple, realistic, avoid the hype. We've seen it just recently, ASIC forced a fund manager that was promoting very complex debt-related products as simple bank equivalent products, and ASIC have effectively forced them out of business. Now, that's protecting, in my view, tens of thousands of people from making terrible decisions because they're trying to get a high return from a safe investment when today safe investments are generating very low returns. And we've seen it in the past, and I won't name institutions, but countless collapses promised a lot from safe investments that have ended up leaving investors in tears, with massive losses to be faced. So, keep it simple, stick to the basics, make sure it's evidence-based, and then stay disciplined with investing. They're key planks, in my view, to someone being a successful investor. And I think they in part at least echo Benjamin Graham's comments. And if I can just relate something also to Warren Buffett, some years ago, he very publicly gave away a massive proportion of his wealth to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to manage for the benefit of society, going forward. And he insisted that the money be invested in an index portfolio where nobody made any predictions whatsoever and nobody had to forecast anything to do in the future. And I think that's a really good starting point for most people. It's certainly the starting point of our investment philosophy. And through academic research, we think there's ways to do just a bit better than that. But that's about as good as it gets.
That's a great note to close off that discussion on structure, Peter. So thanks for that. So, Peter, we've talked about structure and the importance of what to think about, what not to do, traps to avoid, but importantly, bringing it back to, when you're planning your financial life, make sure you've got a process and a structure involved, even though we're doing it for very human, emotional reasons. And, we talk about a qualitative thing like values and purpose, but you still want to be implementing and getting things done in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So, Peter, this is a podcast about values and purpose. So as we finish up, we know that different people have a different way about thinking about their purpose in life. And often we don't know what that is either. Not only that, our purpose and our values can change and evolve at different times in our life as well. So based on your journey so far, how do you think about your purpose right now?
Well, in the intro, you use the word evolve, and I would say that purpose throughout my career has definitely evolved. When I first started in the industry, I was still 2 years away from being married. So I guess the first thing was I wanted to be successful so that I could, care for myself. And then I met Leonie, and then I wanted to make sure that we could build, a meaningful life together. And then a few years later, luckily, children came along. So the focus was, of course, what are we going to be able to do, or what do I need to do to make sure that, I give our children the opportunities that I'd like to see them have available to them. And then as that evolved and we became even more secure, I became much more focused on creating a great work environment and opportunities for our team here. And then we grew the business here, and then, of course, grew it nationally. So there was a desire to help influence other people, to build successful businesses. I took on significant activities through our local community, got involved with a couple of local government institutions, ran the local medical research fund. So I guess helping people through financial advice is very central to my character. I love to help other people. In fact, it's the byline to our company name, Mancell Financial Group, helping people. And it could be helping people with anything, really. But it really started, firstly at a primary level with myself, then grew through my family, through the community of advisors that, we've helped to grow, and our local community here. And I'd like to think that, I'm going to positively influence financial advice more broadly across Australia in some way for the benefit of everyone across our community. But with the central focus being that everyone that we can help, including ourselves, it's all about allowing the people to do what they really love and enjoy and spending time with those that they care most about. That's the message that I try to get across to every client. And it's certainly, at the very core of my own ethos. I want to spend my time doing the things that I love with the people that I care most about. And I think good advice is central to that, to everyone that we help.
Thanks for sharing that, Peter. That's wonderful. It aligns very much with this podcast, this focus on values and purpose. And the whole reason I started the podcast was to share the knowledge with as many people as possible, and bring wonderful experts in like yourself to share your stories and your wisdom with everyone that's able to listen, so that they can improve their lives and hopefully make better financial decisions, connecting them to their purpose. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on, Peter. Again, so much wisdom you've had to share with us, and always enjoy our chats. So thank you once again.
Look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Peter. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Our aim is to share the knowledge with as many people as possible, so please share it with everyone you know. And if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, to get access to all our free resources. See you next time.